And I'll turn things over to our team here, starting with Christine Wytaske.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session on getting ready for the new CASAS STEPS test. We originally thought we were going to get started with 10 tips to make sure, and then we ended up with 10 testing tips and 10 instructional tips and maybe a few bonus ones thrown in there. So I think if you're curious about the STEPS test, you're in the right place to learn some really cool things today. All right. Some of our objectives in this session, first we want to do just kind of like a general check-in, who's in the session, review what we already know, and then talk about the new tests and not only the like what's in the test, but also like the administration of the tests and some of the reporting features that we can find, discuss what we can find or what this means for instruction in the classroom, explore some resources, and then maybe plan for what some good next steps would be. So first, we're going to introduce ourselves. So as Patsy said, I'm Christine Wytaske. I work at Metro South Adult Basic Education. We are in Bloomington. My role here is the lead EL teacher and coordinator, and then some tech digital literacy specialist type things. And I presented a session on STEPS with Patsy at a couple of the regionals. So I'm happy to be joining Linda and Marty here for this session at Language and Literacy.
And I'm Marty Olsen. I work with Southwest ABE, do training in both CASAS and TAPE throughout the state. And I'll be talking more today about this new STEPS test.
Good afternoon. My name is Linda Keller. My full-time role is with Hennepin with Metro North, and I'm the accountability coordinator. Here, what that means is I do all things SID related, testing related, data related, and data collection related. I'm also work on the test training team with Marty Olsen to deliver CASAS and TAPE training here in Minnesota, and I've been part of Adult Basic Ed for I think 28 years now. So welcome.
All right, great. Well, we can already see the names in the like who the participants are, but maybe if we could just take a minute or two and in the chat, you could put a first name and then what you could put your program, but like really what is your role? We're kind of looking to see who's in the session, like how many are instructors, how many are support staff, how many really are digging into like the testing and the planning. Do we have administrators in here? We would really just like to get a quick snapshot of who's in the session here. There's a little something for everyone, but it's also good to know who's in the room so we can anticipate some questions. Thank you for putting your information in. We appreciate it. Just watching the chat here. Okay, looks like we've got some good representation with teachers, administrators, support staff, and from all over Minnesota, so that's great. And I didn't catch if somebody was outside of Minnesota, so I apologize if I missed somebody that's joining us from out of state. Okay, so as people are continuing to put that information in the chat for us, I'm going to have us move on. In the slide deck here, we've got a lot to cover. We thought this was kind of an interesting little question for you, and also we like the visuals. How are things going in your programs right now and in your context? Does it sometimes feel like herding cats? Feel free to, add something to the chat. If there's anybody that wants to unmute and share a little bit, we've got a minute or two to do a quick check-in. Could be things like how are things going in general, or if you've started transitioning in these tests from the life and work to the steps. We'd be curious to hear any feedback. How are things going, or do you feel a little bit like you're herding cats? I'm gonna give some wait time here. All right, it's okay to be shy. I don't know if you guys see Marty and Linda, if you see anything in the chat that you want to shout out. No? All
I
right,
have
we're gonna,
not.
all right, we're gonna move forward.
Okay, so how many of you have had this particular cat in your program? Someone who, says about change, which is what we're doing with this new step test. There's two things we don't like: change, but also the way things are. So how many people have complained over the last few years about the tests as they were, saying they need to be updated, we need to do something different? And then now we're there, and it's like, oh, you mean I need to change some things with what I'm doing in my instruction in order to meet the standards of this test? So we may have a few of those grumpy cats in our programs. We'll learn more about the steps as we move forward. So next slide, please, Christine. So we're going to be looking at this. The first part is we're going to talk about the steps. If you click again, Christine, I think okay. So we are going to talk about the updates on the life and work tests, where that is, and where it's going. It's still here, so we'll have to work a little bit for a little bit with the steps test yet. And then we're going to talk about launching, or the life and work test is here for a while, and the steps test is the new one. So we'll talk about launching steps and what that could look like, what the steps test has to offer. Next slide, please. So the current tests that have been around for a while, yes, I'll admit it, would be the life and work reading, the life and work listening, and then the math goals. We're talking more about the ESL level test today, but some of you may use a math test on occasion with some of your students. So just to be aware of that. These three tests have all had their approval extended through June 30th of this year. So they can be used through the end of this program year. So they're not gone yet. They're going away, but they're still around. And that leads us to our first tip on the next slide is make sure your students have the opportunity to do their post-testing. They can continue to garner hours since their previous pre-test in life and work. And if they get to that 40+ hours, make sure they get a post-test. It's important that we give them the opportunity because we've been teaching toward the goals on this test. So make sure they have a post-test. Next slide, please. Okay, so now, the exciting part of this is talking about the new steps tests. These are approved, and the state of Minnesota has approved them. So they are approved for a period of 7 years through July 13th of 2030, which is kind of a strange date, but that is the date. So reading steps focused on ESL, listening steps also for ESL, and then there's a new math goals 2 test, which will replace the old math goals test. So one thing to note is that, first of all, with these new tests, staff that's been trained already is good with their training. These are multiple choice tests. They are standardized tests. So the things that we teach you and talk about in training and implementation training will be the same for steps. So there's no need for new test training. However, you definitely need to become familiar with your test administration manual because timing is going to be a little bit different with the STEPS tests, and obviously scoring and some of those things. So make sure that you do think about that as you move, as you have new people administering, or old people, previous people administering the new tests. Okay, so just want to throw this in there. If you do need training, or you have staff who needs training, we have a couple coming up. There's going to be an implementation training, and it will be in person on Friday, February 16th from 1 to 4 at Literacy, Minnesota. And if you need more information on that right now, you can contact Linda. There'll be more information in the newsletter coming out. And then for CASAS recertification, there will be a virtual training. That's going to be Monday, March 18th from 2 to 3. And there will be registration that's not available yet, but it will come out in February. And if you need more information, you can contact me. Next slide, please. One more tip here. The new tests have been approved. You can pre-test in STEPS as soon as your program's ready to go. You don't have to wait until all of the post-testing in life and work is done. You don't need to wait 40 hours since the last life and work test. STEPS is a new series. So being a new series, you can go ahead and do the test at any point with your learners. Students can continue to build those hours in life and work at the same time as they're starting a new set of hours for STEPS. Okay, I've said STEPS several times. I guess it's probably time to talk a little bit about the acronym, what it means. CASAS loves their acronyms, and STEPS is no different. So STEPS, you can see here, stands for Student Test of English Progress and Success, which is a mouthful, certainly not something you're going to want to say over and over and over again. So STEPS is what we're going to focus on. The tip here is to remember that STEPS is designed only for learners for whom English is not their first language. Even if you have a beginning literacy person who has English as a first language, STEPS is not the appropriate test for them. And then it's for English language learners who score under 239. So I realize that some programs may set other cut scores, and that's fine. That's a but as far as the STEPS test has been designed, it's for ELLs who up to the score of 239. At that point, or at some other determined point by a program, you can move the students either to goals, or perhaps you're using TABE, so you could go to TABE 11, 12 at that point as well. So let's take a look at the old test versus the new test. Life and work reading was originally written with 4 levels, whereas the STEPS test has 5. So there's a difference right off the top. It does cover all 6 NRS levels. Both of these series do and did. However, Life and Work was focused on CASAS content standards as well as the CASAS competencies. The STEPS test is focused on the English language proficiency standards and the CASAS competencies. Now, don't get too excited about that. Throwing the English language proficiency standards. those correspond directly to the college and career readiness standards that we've been talking about in Minnesota for several years now. Christine will talk a little bit more about those standards when she talks about instructional implications. Next slide, please. So here's a question I have had many times in the last couple of months since we started using STEPS. What do I do with my beginning literacy students? Well, you should be giving them a level A. What you're going to find is you're going to have to learn a little bit or understand a little bit different the levels. They're going to be slightly different, and we'll look at those numbers in a minute. So don't worry. I know 27 and 28 are going away. You know, that was kind of a love-hate relationship. People were not happy with them, and yet relied heavily on those tests for the beginning literacy student. So if we go to the next slide, Christine, you'll see here is a sample. This is not an actual item, just want you to know that, but it's a sample of what an item in level A might look like. And doesn't that look familiar as to something that might have been in the 27-28? However, it's nice and colorful and pretty easy to discern what this is a picture of. So this focuses then on the high frequency vocabulary using a picture as a prompt. Next slide, please. Another thing they do is this, high frequency vocabulary abbreviations, and certainly a possibility of some matching of letters and so forth in this one. But again, this should look fairly familiar to those who gave the 27-28 for many years. Next slide, please. Dates. Our beginning literacy students need to learn dates, so that certainly is something that we can focus on with our beginning lit students. And I think we have one more. Okay, another picture. Kind of graphic here, just black and white, but certainly recognizable. And a word that many of our learners will be able to read. So you can see then that level A should be a level that can work with our beginning lit students. Okay. What I want you to focus on here is to see that let's look at the right first. That's the test level breakdown. You can see that each CASAS level relates to the one above it, and there's overlap. So that encourages you as teachers to build that, do the scaffolding so that you build the skills that will help the student to grow and be able to move to that next level. And you can see how those levels relate to the NRS levels. If you look at the left here, you can see those NRS levels. You can see the ESL level names, and I know some programs call their programs by level 1, 2, 3, and others use the level names. So nice that both are located here. But what's important then would be the scale score ranges. You'll see that those scale scores, I really like the fact that they've made them about 10 to 12 points within each range. So there's ability to move, but move through the levels fairly evenly. If we look at the next slide, we have another test tip. And one thing people worried about, and a question I've gotten is, oh no, the scale scores are different. Do we have to make some changes with our educational functioning level? What's going on? I don't understand. Okay, that's another thing, just calm down. Use some of the skills we talked about this morning. The educational functioning level descriptors for ESL were changed in about 2016, and those remain the same. It's the scale score ranges that are different based on the content of the STEPS test. So as long as you put in that you're reporting on the STEPS test, those scale scores will drop your students into the correct level, NRS level. Next slide, please. This is something to be aware of is those educational functioning level descriptors. They are written so that you can understand what a learner should be able to do as they exit each level, which hopefully you can back up as a teacher then and look at what you should be instructing in each of those levels. This information, you can find it online for sure, but you can also find it in your test administration manual. Remember I said read your test administration manual? This is some information that's in there. So you'll be able to learn more about the level students you're teaching and what sort of things are going to be tested at each level.
I just want to say we also have this in our participant folder, so you can also access it there.
Yep. Thanks, Christine. Okay. And then we can talk a little bit then about the listening test, which has also got some upgrades from the life and work listening tests. First of all, the life and work listening test had 3 levels, whereas the new STEPS test has 5. That, to me, that's one of the most exciting things about this, is just to be able to hopefully understand the abilities of more students because of the wider range that's going to be tested. Same things as far as NRS levels and proficiency levels. The new STEPS test does have correspond to the English language proficiency standards, which is tied very closely to the college and career readiness standards. Next slide, please. If you look here, it's going to look very similar to the reading slide that we looked at. And if you look at the right, yeah, very similar. Just remember then you're building, you're scaffolding with your learners to help them get from level A all the way up through level E. And you can imagine if a learner is reaching that level E listening, their skills are getting pretty high. So that's something that we want to work toward. You can look at the scale score ranges, and one thing you might notice is these numbers are different from the reading ranges. That's okay. Again, it's a different test. And so the numbers that we're looking at are going to be different. They're assigned based on the difficulty of the test. Next slide, please. So one thing that this test tip is, consider administering the listening test in addition to your reading test. More and more programs have started to at least look at the listening test. The idea is you learn more about your student. If you just know their reading skills, you might make some assumptions about their listening skills that are wrong. You can take a look at your student and look at how much education they've had. That might affect their reading skills. Listening could fall behind in that case. On the other hand, I have had students who've been in the country, the United States, for 20 plus years. So their listening and speaking was really good. However, they never, in their home country and in the United States, they didn't actually attend much school. So their reading skills were behind. So I think the idea of being able to have both a reading and a listening score gives you a much more well-rounded picture of your learner.
And I'm gonna agree with Marty when she states that too, just with what Metro North has found with the testing that we deliver to, so.
Yep, thank you, Linda. Next slide, please. So that is just a brief overview of what we're seeing with the new tests. If you have any questions, I haven't had a chance to look at the chat, so I don't know if there's any questions. And if I don't see anything yet, if you have questions still, obviously we've got more presentations to share with you, but so far, looking at the new test and the switch over, one thing I don't know if I talked about, I don't think I did, was it's up to you when you make this switch. It just has to be done finally by the 1st of July. As of the 1st of July, the STEPS will be the only test for EL learners. So, other than that, it's up to you how quickly or slowly you choose to make that adaptation. Any further questions? I'm seeing nothing, but okay, Christine, I'll try and be quiet and do that wait thing.
I do see one question asking why the new math test will be named Goals 2 and not STEPS.
Okay, good question. STEPS is for English language learners only. The goals test is for all ABE learners. So if you've got EL learners who you're working with math on them and you want to have a math score, the goals test, or the goals 2, is the only test available. However, it's also the goals is the test that is for any other learners who have English as their first language, or English language learners who've earned that higher score of 239, and then move on to you could say the ABE level, more the adult secondary level. Okay, hopefully that answered your question about that. And goals 2, I know Linda and I thought that wasn't very inventive to use that, but it does let us know that this is the second iteration of the goals test. So I guess that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions, so I think we move on to the next block.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So I'm going to cover different options for reporting in both SID and in TopsPro Enterprise for agencies here in Minnesota that have access to e-testing. So if you want to move to the next slide, please. With STEPS and with goals 2 testing, the testing was approved midsummer last year due to the fact that several states had approved and been early adopters of STEPS. Information started getting provided to the CASAS teams so that they could understand what the differences were between students who had previously taken life and work testing and were now being delivered STEPS testing. So Minnesota did not approve the STEPS testing until this last fall. So some of this information is helpful for us to know here in Minnesota as we are moving forward with transitioning into STEPS. So Students may be scoring lower on STEPS reading tests than they did on the life and work, but the reason for that is because the education and workforce landscape changed due to the innovation and globalization. The descriptors for the NRS levels were updated to reflect that change. And then descriptors for them are aligned to the college and career competency standards and English language proficiency also. So next slide, please. What we do know about STEPS tests is that the test is more rigorous than life and work because of all of the changes that were made, but it does not mean that the student's ability went down, but instead their ability is aligning to the standards that describe each of the new NRS levels. And all of this information was in a CASAS updates webinar from this last October. And you can listen to the webinar. They have all of their past webinars posted online on www.casas.org. And the next slide, please. One of the things that programs will likely need to consider, and with the local, like with our program here at Metro North, we adopted enrollment testing with STEPS just starting here in January. And because it took a little bit longer to get orders placed for paper pencil materials, and we ordered them for all of the sites, but intake placement may need to be modified locally because of the different score ranges and because of the different tests. And so that may mean that cut scores for program entrance and for class levels, if you run a large program with multiple levels of ESL, they may need to be modified. And your teachers may need to have additional training on the ELP standards also to address the CCR standards and the increased rigor of the test. Metro North just last week with 2 of our larger programming sites have some provisional placement charts that we found, and I do have a slide for one of the sites upcoming in the next slide. So the next slide shows a sample placement chart that is used at the Blaine location for the specific class levels. And this chart shows the life and work reading scores and levels, and then the score ranges. And Metro North also uses Best Plus speaking test in order to determine appropriate class placement. And these are all of the ranges that were used. Something to consider with placement charts for your program. Each of our locations at Metro North, because the larger locations serve anywhere between 300 and 1,000 students annually. These placement charts are constantly getting adapted based on who's enrolling in the program to make sure that class sizes are distributed evenly across the staffing that we have. So with the date that we have embedded in there, this was the last time that the Blaine location adapted the cut scores to get into classes. And again, this is the life and work chart. It shows the ranges to get and move out into the next level of class. So with the next slide that I'm going to show, one of the things that we did last week after a very large all-site post-testing session, we had life and work scores in SID records for reading, and we also had STEPS reading tests. And what our staffing did here at the Blaine location was that we looked at the amount of people who placed into specific test levels and ranges to do some provisional updating of our placement scores and into the different class levels, because we have 5 different class levels at the Blaine location currently that deliver ESL classes. And one of the things that we found, because this location that I work out of does not use the 27 and 28 for our level 1 because we don't offer pre-lit classes here, but our Columbia Heights location does. We found that there was only one student that tested into the 621, 622 levels, which I thought was kind of interesting because students placed into our level 1 class are either testing with an 81 or an 82, or they're testing into 81X or 82X. So I just thought that was interesting. We delivered locators to everyone to make sure that they were placed into the appropriate class. And with e-testing, because the testing that we did was an e-testing, there is a locator test to determine appropriate class placement, and that's 14 questions in 15 minutes. If your agency opts to use the appraisal, that is also offered in e-testing, and that's offered in paper pencil testing as well. There are 28 questions and it takes 30 minutes to deliver. So just something to consider moving forward. Next slide, please. So testing tip number 8. Take some time evaluating your STEPS testing data. Can I see, can people put in the chat box whether or not their program has started delivering STEPS yet? And if you're doing it at enrollment or if you're testing all of your current students, I'd be curious to know that as well. Okay. Okay. And I see some yeses and some nos. Just so that you know, if you're ordering paper pencil testing, CASAS now has supplies, and when Metro North ordered paper pencil supplies for our sites that haven't launched e-testing yet, it took less than a month to get all of the materials, including test administration manuals, appraisals, everything. The initial order that we placed for, or I had placed for some test administration manuals very early on, it took us about 2.5 months to just get test administration manuals. So they do have materials in their warehouse, and they will fulfill orders very quickly. So just so that you know. All right, the next page or next slide, please. So SID has several reports in their defined assessment data that has been recorded. There's 2 different reports that you can find this information in. Every class has an assessment tab, and if there are assessments that are recorded on students in that class, teacher level access as well as admin level access can see that information. And in the reports tab, which again, teacher level access and admin level access to SID all have access to these reports. So the second report would be the program-wide report outcome for the level gains, MSGs, and post-test rate report. That report itself, you can filter it by a class, you can filter it by a site, and you can run it for your entire agency. And one of the cool things about that report, because I'm a data geek, is that the boxes that have the pluses in it allow you to expand out sections. So you can actually drill down and look and see students in specific education function levels who may not have gotten a level gain yet. So, that being said, one of the items that when I deliver training here for Metro North for all new staff coming on board based on whatever their role is, I do provide them with guidance on how to run those reports in the classes tab and how to find that, how to sort it, options to export it out into Excel. Based on your role in your agency, I'm not I don't know who in this group is all familiar with how to find that, but the next several screens, I'm going to show you where you would look for that and then talk to you about some updates that the SID team did for all of us, which I think is a really good bonus. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So the SID class assessment report, that's a super recent update. You would find that by just going onto your home tab. You would click on the class hyperlink on your home tab. And normally it lands on your attendance tab, or it lands on the calendar for you to record attendance. But when you select the attendance tab within that class, which is right next to the calendar page, you can go in there and you can look at, there is a test filter column, and there is a date range column, and there is a retest column that you can sort students who you can look and see whether or not they have enough hours to test. But if you use these steps that I have in the slide, if you embed the term CASAS in the test filter, it will populate any CASAS testing that that student has ever taken, whether it's in goals, goals 2, life and work, or now steps. Hopefully that information is helpful, because in the past, the life and work terminology was not embedded into that report. But I found that it hadn't been embedded, and for those of us that are seasoned and said, you know, we knew it may be confusing with the multiple levels of, or the multiple series that CASAS has in order to sort the information, but super awesome report, digging down into your data. There's a button on that page to allow you to export it out to Excel to kind of look even deeper if you need to. So if you want to click on the next slide, this is what that assessment tab looks like. And these are all the different filters that you can put any kind of information into based on how you want to sort it. The screenshot that I took, I obviously didn't put any student data into it because I didn't want to share student data. I just put the term CASAS in the test filter. But if you go to the next page, you can see the data sort that I did. Actually, yeah, it's the next page. It looks just like an Excel report, Christine. There it is right there. This was the export that I got out of SID. So again, you can see the name columns completely blank, but in the first column, you can see how many hours each student had. You can see their badge ID, who it's linked to. The fourth column provides you all the different CASAS series that anybody that was in this class that I extracted the data for, it shows all of the different series in there. The next column will show you the subjects of the testing that was done. The next column will show you the form that was delivered, whether it be 81 or the 900 series or the 600 series, so forth. The next column will be the date. The column that says PRI, that is the scaled score of whatever that test that was taken was. And then the EFL level that was assigned to that ESL, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The next column over actually shows you whether or not there was a gain in that subject and in that series. And then the last two columns provide the information about the pre-test EFL within that testing series and subject. So, all right. So the next tab. So if you can follow the steps that I provided, great. However, the SID team has been building all kinds of wonderful how-to videos that I share with staff regularly that are never super long. They're usually anywhere from 2 minutes to 5 minutes long, super comprehensive. Everyone has access to the help tab, whether you're teacher level or admin level. But if you want a video on how to look and review tests for students in your class. Follow this path by going to the SID Help tab, which is the SID Help Center. Click on SID Training and Support. Click on the video lessons for either teacher or admin level login. And then if you're interested and you're at teacher level, you can click on lesson 3, which is the assessments, and just watch it and listen to it. It just explained all of the things that I just explained also. So, all right, the next tab is a screenshot of SID to show you where and how to find your level gains and MSG in post-testing reports. Again, I stated earlier, you can run this for your class, you can run it for your site, you can run it for your agency, and you can dig down and look at outcomes, MSGs, post-testing rates, and so forth. Super awesome report. These are shared monthly with the staff here to evaluate data and to look at outcomes for specific classes and sites, and then the program as a whole. And across the top, you're gonna see all of the tabs because I'm at admin level, but normally a teacher level staff is gonna see the home tab, the students tab, the classes tab, the reports tab, and then you're gonna see the help desk tab also. All right, next slide, please. All right. We have gotten questions from different programs, Marty and I, about TopsPro and e-test reports available. The test administration manuals, the most recent print that we've received from CASAS, do not have the profiles in them like past test administration manuals from past series did have. However, historically, CASAS has updated test administration manuals, and if your agency ordered test administration manuals, they will send you updated versions for however many test admin manuals that you ordered, once they get different profiles embedded within that manual itself. With TopsPro Enterprise, anyone in Minnesota who has access to e-test account and has delivered testing has access to TopsPro Enterprise reports. Both Metro South and Metro North have hold reports. Metro South has managed enrollment. There are things to consider with how to set up your reporting features in TopsPro if you choose to use that option. But just be thinking about, do you do managed enrollment at your agency, or do you do ongoing and rolling enrollment, and like what the definitions of those are? There are TopsPro reports for teachers, and you can run them for an individual learner, you can run them for a class, and you can run them for a whole entire site and a whole entire program. I'm still exploring how to make that work for Metro North with it being relatively new to us. But if you want additional help for how to set it up within your program to extract those reports, I would recommend contacting CASAS staff for just additional guidance, because the information that I'm presenting is what's specific to Metro North and things that we've learned from other programs to what has worked effectively. But this is going to look different for every agency based on your staffing, how much e-testing you're delivering, so forth. So just take those things into consideration. All right, next slide, please. So the information is here is information that provides you your CCR levels, your NRS levels, the EFLs for the ESL, and then it's going to give you the CASAS steps reading and listening ranges, as well as the grade equivalency that's attached to each of those score ranges, and the ELP standard proficiency levels that are associated with those also. You can thank Marty Olsen for organizing this material in a very user-friendly format to get it all in one document. This document is also located in the participant folder as well. All right, and I think I have one more slide. Oh, actually, I can put two. So tip number 10, do make sure that your teachers are made aware of the education function levels to the CASAS scaled score, to the CASAS grade level equivalent information, because that's going to help them understand their student levels for who is in their class or their classes. All right. So I haven't been monitoring the chat because I've been talking. So are there a lot of questions?
Not yet.
Not yet. So if you have questions or if you'd like to speak to the group, please raise your hand or put your questions in the chat. All right. Then I think I'm good with you continuing on, Christine, if you're good.
All right. Here we go. So, okay, so the last block of our slides here, we're going to be talking a little bit about implications for instruction. And we know that this usually targets mostly instructional staff, but it's also good information for, you know, just programs in general. Let's see here. So just to reiterate, I do want to, you know, kind of hit home too that this is such great news because our assessments are finally aligned with the standards and the standards work that we've been doing for a few years now. Many of the resources that you maybe have purchased or, you know, have been working with online are or have been standards aligned. So now we're finally seeing those start to line up. A note about the ELP. So that's the red book. Just for those of you that might not have a lot of working knowledge with it, overall, there are 10 English language proficiency standards, and they cover the areas of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Steps, the STEPS reading test and listening test focus on, you can see 3 of the reading and 2 of the listening standards, okay? So for ELP, it's standards 1, 6, and 8, and for listening ELP, it's 1 and 2. I'm not going to read these to you, and we'll get into it. I've got a document that I'm going to share too in just a minute, but this is just the language that's from the Red Book. What does the language in the Red Book, particular to each of the standards, what does that look like if you don't have familiarity with it? And then how does that compare to the Blue Book is what I'm going to talk about over the next couple of slides. So again, here are the reading standards 1, 6, and 8 for ELP, and on my next slide, here are the listening standard, the ELP standards 1 and 2. And again, these are directly called out by CASAS as these are the standards that show up in the assessments that they've created, okay? Don't freak out. You don't have to learn the ELPs, right? Because we've been doing so much work with the CCRS over the past, I don't know, at least 8 to 10 years, I think. CCRS should still be your primary document for standards. We can take a look at how they work together. If you've been doing the work of the CCRS, you're really in excellent shape to be setting your students up for success, to be able to continue to make level gains as you transition to the STEPS test. Okay. So we have a little bit of extra time, which is what I was hoping for. The PDF of these slides are in the participant folder, by the way, but I'm going to actually click on this. It's a document I created. I was fortunate enough to be able to go out to the CASAS Summer Institute in California in June to kind of learn about what's going on with the new STEPS test. And then once I came back, my mind started churning. Okay, they're focusing on ELPs. I know I've got teachers at my site that are going to be wondering, well, now I got to be digging into that. We've been doing work in the Blue Book. So I sat down and created what I called a crosswalk. So I looked at the Red Book and then I looked at the Blue Book and I created just a 3-page document so that you can actually see what this looks like. So I'm going to click on it and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Now we're not going to take the time to like read through everything, but I just want to show you what this looks like. And I also want to say this is what made sense to my brain. So you can like take this adapt it, put it in a different format for you. What makes sense for you in your context? Are you an administrator or a support staff? Do you think this would be useful for your teachers? Please feel free to use it. I pulled the information right from the red book. There are 2 different views for those of you that are familiar with the ELP book. So I tried to note like the page numbers, like how they correlate. So for example, reading ELP standard 1 specifically correlates to the CCR anchors 1, 2, 3, 7, and the speaking and listening standard anchor 2. Okay. And then if you scroll down, you can see that I do that for each of the reading standards. So here's 6 and 8. And then I did the same for the listening. And I'm visual, so I put some color coding in here too. So I'm going to go back to the slides, but I just wanted to kind of show you like what that is. It is a useful resource for you to have. Oh, let me see if I can get back to my slides with presenting. It kind of puts the pop down in there. Okay. No, give me 1 second here. There we go. Got it. All right. So here's a quick note on, so this comes directly from the CASAS website. There are basically 3 areas that you can look at for pulling information with the reports that you can get. You can look at standards-based information. So the information and literature that comes out from CASAS, they target the ELP standards. I want my staff focused on the CCRS because they are really interwoven with the ELP standards. So think of those as going together. There's the CASAS competencies, and then there's the specific task area. So my next couple of slides are going to kind of walk us through each of those categories to get a little bit more information. And if something comes up in the chat and you guys need to interrupt me, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, we will have a chance at the end to talk about it. So when we're looking at the reading steps, again, it's a nice visual reminder that the content categories really that we're looking at. So of course, we've got vocabulary. We're looking at main idea and inferencing, point of view, details, etc. If we take a look, again, we're looking at the content standards. And if we're looking at an example for the level A test, they've got a nice visual there on the left. So you can kind of see what percentage of each of these areas shows up on the level A test. And then on the right, you can kind of see within each of the content areas, what's the specific standard that's addressed and what are the, here just a second. What are the number of, or the percentage of test items in that particular test that showed up for level A? All right, and if I look again, we've got an example for the level B test as well, for the reading steps test. So you can see how it changes a little bit from the example for level A. And again, all of this information is on the CASAS website, so we highly encourage you to use that as a resource, especially if you haven't started digging into this yet. And again, over on the left, you can see the specific content areas, which standard it ties to, and what percentage of test items were in this category. A look at the listening. Same thing, you've got vocabulary, details, main idea, summary, and dialogue. An example for the level A. How does it break down? And then over on the left, you can see which standards ties to each area and what percentage of test items on the level A test correlate to that. And then here's an example of the listening level C test with the same information. And I apologize if it seems like I'm going fast. I do want to get to a bunch of slides here, and just know that this is on the website and it is in the PDF of our slides. Okay. So that was kind of like the standards, the ELP, the CCRS. CASAS competencies. For those of you that are maybe new to ABE or you haven't dug into the competencies yet, in general, they cover 9 broad content areas. They're listed here. There is a QR code here if you want to pull it up on your phone in the session. But again, we also have it linked. And I believe most of the things, if it's underlined in my slides here, it's linked to the actual PDF of the resource. And we have a PDF in our participant folder as well. Okay, so if you haven't dug into those or looked at them recently, I would highly recommend taking a look to refresh your memory. Again, with the STEPS test, you can pull reports and get information by test level. So here's an example. If we're looking at the CASAS competencies in the level A test, again, on the left, we've got the chart that shows what percentage of questions for each of the categories. The competency area, they give you a nice breakdown of the different competencies that are available, which ones tie to this specific level of test. So this is really great information, particularly I think for teachers that may be thinking, oh my gosh, what should I focus on? How do I, figure out how to make my students the most successful, looking at what curricula we're using, and then also like what kind of classroom activities and practice do I have to make sure that I am actually meeting what's on these new tests. Okay, so this is great information for the teachers to have. Another example, this one at level C for CASAS competencies. Again, you've got the nice visual breakdown on the left, and then you can kind of see over on the right for each of the different competencies that show up in the test and what percentage of test items are in each of those areas. And I believe the PDF of the CASAS competencies itself is a 10-page document. There are, of course, more competencies that exist than what show up on the tests. And then the last area within this block, the standards, the competencies are like the task areas. And we've just got an example here. So visually for the task area, here's an example from the STEPS level C test. You can kind of see here, so you've got some signs, ads, and labels, forms, charts, tables, and graphs, texts, emails, articles, narratives, etc. And then what percentage of test items actually show up in that task area for this level test. So I believe CASAS has done a really great job trying to set us up for success so we can look at what kind of things are showing up depending on the level of test the students in a specific class might be looking at. So just to reiterate, it's actually good news. We have culturally relevant and responsive test items, which is such an improvement from the tests that we had before, the life and work. I think we talked about in an earlier session too, particularly on the new STEPS test. The life and work test was approved and has been being used for around 20 years. So it's about time we get a new updated test. So it includes things like email, job search, troubleshooting Wi-Fi connectivity, working remotely, interpreting websites, and more things that are more up to date for today's world. Okay, that's a lot of information. I do think, well, I'm just trying to think if we've got, let's go into breakout rooms for like about 4 minutes here. And I want you to just talk about like, what are you thinking about with all this new information? Is there anything that was learned or affirmed for you? Or are you still kind of struggling or grappling with something?
Yeah, 4 minutes plus 1 minute to come back, Christine.
Yes.
All right. All right, you'll go into breakouts in just a moment. The questions to talk about are on the screen. They are slowly coming to their microphones.
Like, it's a quiet group. It's a lot of
It's a lot to take in, but they're talking now, so it's okay.
information. Good.
And
Someone
I see that now too, because I'm like, oh, nobody has their.
at
mic.
first it's like, oh, what am I doing?
Oh, wait, I got to pay attention now.
Yeah. No,
I
it's
think
okay.
what I'm going to do for time's sake is just tell people, like there's a bunch of information, like feedback from like Metro South staff. I don't have time to like read that to you, but you can always come back to the slides
Yeah.
because I do want to take some time just walking them through the 10 tips,
For sure.
finishing up with the resources, and then we can give the shout out to the Burlington stuff
Yeah.
in the link.
That sounds good. All right, they have 2 minutes plus 1 to return.
Okay, that should be just about enough time if I don't
Yeah,
fail.
it's 1:51, so that'll bring them back at like 1:54.
Okay.
Should be fine.
2 o'clock.
Just a couple of seconds here. I just realized I forgot to turn off the recording. Oh well.
Okay, people are starting to come back now, yes?
Yep, everyone's back.
Okay, so to be mindful of time, we've just got about 5 minutes left here, and I do have a few more slides to get through. Does anybody have any like burning questions or anything that they want to throw out? You can either put it in the chat or unmute your mic.
I have a quick question, Christine. So
Sure.
I have seen the CASAS competencies correlation, and I have seen the blueprint and the ELP document, but where can we find the particular like test level to what percentage of the competencies does it correlate to? Which document is that in?
When you say the test, so like if you're looking at the B-level test and which competencies,
And the percentage of the questions that you showed us, was it your work? Or
I pulled that from the CASAS website.
okay.
So I would visit casas.org. Okay. And I think, let me see if there's anything in the chat here. All right, I'm going to move us ahead here. We'll always come back at the end. Just a few, I'm not going to read through all of this. Again, you can come back and review it, but some of the feedback early on, Metro South was one of the early sites to start doing the reading test. And so we had our teachers sit down and do an example test, I think back in November or late October, whenever they released it, just to like get their thoughts on it. And I think our data person was looking to get information to give feedback. And so these were some of the things that teachers indicated as they took the tests. And it kind of reaffirms what CASAS has on their website as far as what you see in the tests. Okay. And I apologize if it seems if I'm going fast here. A quick note, we did just start rolling up the listening test to all of our folks that are currently enrolled. And we do everything on e-test, and it's a 15-minute locator. And then the system assigns them the appropriate test based on how they score on the locator. One thing that I think we found some students were a little frustrated by is like they can't pause it, they can't go back, they don't have control over what's happening in the test. So I think it's helpful for teachers or test administrators to know some of the messaging. It's almost like I'm playing a CD from the front of the room or a tape, and they give you a short pause to make your choice, but then they move on. You can't pause it to get for more time. And so I think that's a helpful piece of information for folks to have. All right, so I wanted to cover some just general tips for instructional staff. If you've been doing the work of the CCRS, focus on the shifts, okay? So we want to continue to work on building knowledge, looking for evidence, things like that. Every class period, maybe think about routines like asking students, how do you know? Show evidence, show me where you found that. Use more than one text for more than one activity, or for more than one type of text on a topic, for example. And you want to build the idea of using text sets, or like read broadly to build knowledge. So you're not just taking one text, or you can take a text and find different ways to use it, different things you're doing, referring back to the same text. So you're getting that repeated reading in there. Vocabulary, word work, synonyms, abbreviations, things like that. Definitely worth digging into doing some extra work on that in that area. Sign up for and make sure to read the MN ABE Connect newsletter. Again, I'll say it again, go to the CASAS.org website. There's lots of good information there. Sample test items, questions, things like that. And then also, if the teachers are curious, you could decide as a program if that's something you allow them to take a test so they get a look and feel for it. Don't forget about the MN ABE YouTube channel. If it's underlined here, it links to a couple of examples of things that I pulled from the ABE YouTube channel. Atlas Resource Library is another great thing to take a look at. Again, I pulled a couple of resources, academic vocabulary, listening, that type of practice that might be worth beefing up in your program or in your classroom. And then work together. Don't necessarily just wait for PD. Figure out how to collaborate with either people at your site or maybe at other sites that are working on the work, getting up to date with the steps, and learn from each other. We do have a lot of resources. Again, a lot of this is in the participant folder, but if it's underlined here, it links. So in the PDF, you can link to all of these resources, and there's a lot of great information. So specific to reading, specific to listening, the competencies, etc. Same thing, you can get the digital versions of both the CCRS book and the ELPs. Please visit the participant folder. I think Patsy was going to drop, or somebody was going to drop something in the chat. There is a training coming up at some point with Burlington English. So if we want to get that in the chat. And hopefully, as we head toward the end of time here, you feel a little bit more like you're getting your ducks in a row. And if not, feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to answer any questions we can. This is our contact information. As I want to be mindful of your time, and it is 2 o'clock. If you want to hang around, if you have any specific questions, just let us know. Otherwise, thank you for attending our session.
Great. Thank you so much, Christine, and Marty and Linda. Come on back so we can thank you properly. Really appreciate all this great information you shared. I remember when the new GED rolled out, and it was just a lot of uncertainty, and then we got used to it, right? Same with this test, I'm sure. So we appreciate your leadership as you lead us through this time. So thank you so much. I'm going to pause the recording. If I can find the right button. Give me a sec.